I want to start by just sharing an inconvenient truth with you. Within 100 years, everyone watching and everybody listening to this, and everybody that you know and that they know, are going to be dead. What we're always facing isn't our impending deaths, it's our impending lives. And what we do with the space between our first breath and our last breath makes a difference. Filling that space is ours to do, and what we fill it with makes a difference. You know, there's a critical disconnect today between the natural world that's our home and the manufactured commercial, political, and religious worlds that we live in. I grew up on a farm, and my time spent in and with nature was some of the richest and some of the most productive and informative times of my life. I was intimately aware of the impact of the change of seasons. I marveled at the magic hidden in the soil that produced crops from seeds. I was really aware that everything seemed connected in some way. And it was that connection, nature's secret sauce, that produced the opportunity to thrive. Unfortunately, many of us have little to no real connection to nature or an appreciation of it as a teacher. We don't know the source of our drinking water. We think it comes out of a tap. We have little appreciation for growing seasons. We eat diets that have natural nutrients processed out of them. We consume more and more, and we are chronically overweight, underslept, overstressed, and we live lives that are empty of compelling meaning. The consequences of this disconnect are profound in terms of financial, social, ecological, emotional, political, and spiritual costs. In the US, for example, the mortality rate's declining, and we're the only advanced economy in the world where this is happening. Health issues are increasing, opioid abuse is rampant, and political discourse has gone completely off the rails. We're disconnected from each other, and we're disconnected from life. Solutions to this disconnect are present in nature, and they aren't new. They've always been there, and they were fundamental to economist Adam Smith's formulation of a theory that is now known as capitalism. Today, understanding and learning to leverage those solutions is absolutely necessary if we're going to be able to get ourselves back on track. I mentioned Adam Smith. In 1776, he wrote The Wealth of Nations, and that was the book that would become the basis for what we now call capitalism. And the ideas presented in the book were built in part on a foundation defined by what he called the invisible hands of commerce. Now, this is a real simple metaphor that basically described the mechanisms for how beneficial social and economic outcomes could arise from the accumulated self-interested actions of what he called virtuous individuals. Before writing The Wealth of Nations, he wrote another book called The Theory of Moral Sentiment, which was the philosophical basis for his notion of the invisible hands. And it was rooted in what we might call enlightened self-interest. Smith ends The Theory of Moral Sentiment by defining the character of his truly virtuous person as being someone who's mindful of taking actions in their own self-interest, while at the same time considering the impact of those actions on the interests of a larger whole that they felt connected to. The power of the invisible hands is the recognition and acting upon the truth that nature presents. We're all connected to everything. As Smith saw it, it's the accumulated actions of individuals that recognize this interconnection that creates the uplifting, the self-regulating, and the enlightened invisible hands of commerce. I think it's worth noting that nature informed much of Smith's economic philosophy because he saw in it the only truly free market economy. Nature embodies enlightened self-interest versus the rational self-interest that's the hallmark of today's capitalist economy. We can look to areas in nature that are thriving to begin to understand how this works. Nature's answers for how thriving is achieved in a diverse ecosystem with competing needs is pretty simple. It's connection and it's communication. Open communication is the lifeblood of a free market. The free exchange of information is what enables the enlightened self-interest that Smith wrote about. It's predicated on a consciousness of connection, not separation. And it's a consciousness that produces an abundance of possibilities, not simply an abundance of riches. While we definitely don't find this free exchange of information in today's markets, there is ample and compelling evidence that it does freely exist, and it's a freely structured information exchange that exists in nature. As a matter of fact, it's the signature hallmark of a thriving ecosystem. Now, here's a quick and simple example of communication enabled by connection that can be found underground, where trees in a forest are often interconnected by networks of mycorrhizae. These are strands of fungus that inhabit tree roots. And it's thought that the mycorrhizae form fungal bridges between individual trees so that all the trees in a forest are literally connected. This is key to certain trees knowing when to collectively produce fruits and berries to feed unanticipated population explosions in forest animals that periodically happens. And this is called masting. Enlightened self-interest benefiting seemingly unconnected forest animals needing food. Through connection comes survival, and with communication comes thriving. All flourishing is mutual, and it's the hallmark of a thriving ecosystem and a thriving economy. Again, it's enlightened self-interest. I win, you win. Now, my work's in business. And another inconvenient truth is that business is the most powerful force on the planet today. I mean, there is nothing on this planet that isn't in some way impacted by the activity of business. And I think that's both the good news and the bad news. In nature, generosity is the key to thriving, and it's predicated on connection, communication, and a consciousness of abundance. And it's those three things that preserve a healthy balance. Pope Francis once wrote that rivers don't drink their own waters, trees don't eat their own fruit, the sun doesn't shine on itself, and flowers don't spread their fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. Now, why does this matter? Well, most businesses, and this is the bad news, don't operate from a position of generosity. And beyond concerns about profitability, most businesses are completely disconnected from the consequences of their actions. And that disconnect is the consequence of rational self-interest. What's in it for me? The unquestioned engine of today's capitalist economy is a push to grow at any cost by increasing consumption. It drives literally the world's economy, not generosity. It's not a sustainable process, and it reinforces a divisive world of haves and have-nots, which in turn produces aggressive hoarding behaviors, where the focus is on being sure that I get mine, which in turn creates fear of scarcity. The byproduct of that fear is missing out is a reinforcing of a sense of division and separation. We basically have two economies to contrast. The first economy is capitalism in its current form. It's an economy based on quid pro quo consumption, informed by rational self-interest and the need to dominate and be in control. This much service or product requires this much payment, reward. In many ways, it's become the entire worldview of all life, and it informs and controls our fundamental relationships and our sense of identity and place. I deserve, you owe me, I'm the boss, you work for me, I'll be good and generous if it helps. Rational self-interest. This system of transactional exchange is the root cause of the great divisions we see today. Divisions like systemic racism, income inequality, gender inequality. And it seems reasonable to almost anybody that's in positions of power because it's rational. It's rational self-interest. I got mine. Now contrast this generally accepted understanding of capitalism with the economy that nature presents. Nature's economy has no equivalence between what's given and how much is gotten. It's not inherently transactional. Entitlement is not part of the economic bargain. Nobody deserves anything. There's no boss. It's all a gift. Nature's economy can be called compassionate capitalism. Compassion means I act as if I care about what happens to you because I'm connected to you. A compassionate capitalist cares about, reinforces, and cultivates connections with generosity and caring that values the well-being of all stakeholders that are touched by his or her business. Until we begin to live as if everything is interconnected, we're going to continue to think and act as if we're separate from everything, exactly like what's evident in the world today. Make no mistake, we've been programmed, we've been educated, and we've been acculturated to accept a world governed by seemingly logical and rational decisions. It's rational to think that the purpose of business is to make a profit. It's rational to think that leaving money on the table is crazy. On the other hand, a mindset of enlightened self-interest positions us to think that the purpose of business is to uplift the experience of being alive on the planet. It takes compassion and courage to act in service of that purpose. Nature, even at its harshest, is compassionate because it honors the sacredness of connections. So my question is, how does or how will your business do this? As an example, I make available for free much of my intellectual property. I've built philanthropy into my business model, not as an afterthought, but as an integral part of how I work. We have to stop counting, we have to stop measuring, and we have to stop comparing. We have to stop saying, I deserve, and deciding who doesn't deserve. None of us deserves. Generosity and compassion are the hallmarks of a thriving natural ecosystem. Nutrients are given, shades given, fruit and seeds are given, without concern for return, all parts of the system thriving. We act as centers of distribution, not accumulation. These natural laws of generosity and compassion are key to economic thriving as well as being foundational to a healthy society. It puts us in touch with what's elemental, our collective soul. Now, the good news about the pervasiveness of business today is that it's positioned to positively impact literally everything on this planet. And it's in this context that I say business needs to be approached as a spiritual discipline. It's a discipline that's informed first and foremost by a recognition that everything is connected. And spiritual disciplines can be and are hard. They require difficult decisions made in service of healthy, sustainable growth that benefits a greater connected whole, not just the individual piece. Because business is the most influential force on the planet, fostering compassionate behavior is key to addressing the illusion of division. Compassion requires connection, and nurturing connection is what businesses and individuals need to do if we're going to thrive. And it's hard to do. Adam Smith's notion of enlightened self-interest naturally rooted in experience connection may seem like an unattainable utopia. But if we define innovation as the art of being increasingly more relevant, and if we define success as the progressive realization of worthy ideals, then it's a utopia well worth aspiring to. It's simply a matter of choice. In the words of the playwright Oscar Wilde, a map of the world that doesn't include utopia isn't worth even glancing at because it leaves out the one country at which humanity's always landing. And when humanity lands there, it again looks out and seeing a better country again sets sail. Progress is the realization, he said, of utopias. The challenge I leave you with today is to imagine utopia and then do what you need to do to fill that gap between your first breath and your last breath with the elements of that utopia. We end up designing a world that designs us in return. Thank you.